to cross-examination by all parties.
Keep that available.
Happily.
I'm so glad that's what I remembered, but I was,
All right, let's get settled, please. All right, if we can get settled. And I'm reading from the NOI directly. It says, Deputy Director Albrecht will briefly testify in regards to his qualifications and experience in air quality, which EHD expects to take no longer than 10 minutes, which it did. EHD will then tender Deputy Director Albrecht for open cross-examination by all parties. So I think that.
Can you give me the number of the NLI before you begin?
Docket number 175 and 175.1.
And Mr. Hearing Officer, this is petitioners, Eric Chance for petitioners. We again renew our objection to parties cross-examining Mr. Albrecht. There's no direct testimony proffered. That's a failure of notice to the parties and would violate the board's Part 82 rules of procedure.
All right, thank you. On the basis of that text, Mr. Mulvihill, I'm going to go ahead and proceed with questions from the board. And just to make the parties aware, if we're not completed before 8 o'clock this evening, we will resume on Monday morning at 10 o'clock at the regular here in this building. So, all right. And it's here, it's the same
here?
Same place.
No, here.
Okay. I thought it was.
Okay, but in this room?
In this room.
Okay, awesome.
Okay.
You're amazing.
No change.
All right.
In a different building, I apologize. Yeah, right back there.
All right, we'll take questions from the board. Vice Chair Richards, are you still online?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
You may proceed with questioning Mr. Albrecht if you have any questions.
Yes, I sure do. Mr. Albrecht, I'm happy that you showed up because it's been difficult kind of figuring this stuff out without your presence. So thank you for coming in this evening. I just had I have several questions, actually. I'm going to try and ask them quickly. One of my questions is, hold on, I may have the wrong. I was looking at your I was looking at docket number 3. Am I allowed to ask questions on docket number 3, Mr. Hearing Officer?
Yes, go
Okay.
ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you. And you had mentioned that this is only the second time that EHD had received any kind of petition outside of the petition that EHD generally generates in-house. And you mentioned because of that, because it's the only the second time you've received a proposed rule outside of the department, that it has not gone through the rigorous pre-petition regulation development or the stakeholder engagement processes. And I'm just wondering, I know that, well, I should ask you a question. I know that we've gone through several different, since I've been on the board, we've gone through at least 3 department directors. And we started talking about cumulative impacts in earnest on February 2021. Does the department have any record of that? This was when we were talking about a cumulative impacts committee on February 2021.
I wouldn't have knowledge of that since I wasn't part of the department back in 2021.
Okay, and I think that's where some of the stakeholder process information is getting lost because there have been so many transitions in staff at EHD. So you're not familiar with a contract with Rosemary Romero, who facilitated a cumulative impacts committee that was announced by the board at 3 consecutive meetings for stakeholder interest?
I became in my role in August 1 of 22. And I just was briefed on that there was a facilitator named Rosemary.
Okay, so you don't have any information. I just was wondering about that. Were you in your role as deputy director when the board actually discussed hiring Mr. Richard Virtue as a hearing officer for the pre-hearing meetings?
Yes, I was.
Okay. And are you aware that he ended up having to resign for health reasons, which is why we subsequently retained, or you subsequently retained the current hearing officer?
That is correct.
Okay. And so I'm wondering for the pre-hearing meetings, are you aware of a document by the hearing officer, Richard Virtue, that said, that recommended ending the pre-hearing meetings because there no progress essentially was being made?
Yeah, they identified pre-hearing conferences due to the fact that the petitioners didn't do a stakeholder process prior to submitting their petition.
Is that what the Richard Virtue stated in his record, in his report back to the board?
I'm not sure. I don't. Ask the question again.
Okay. I'm referring to the prior hearing officer, and this is where it gets confusing because the staff has transitioned. I think I've been on the board longer than much of the staff that supports our board. But essentially, there was a hearing officer's order on pre-hearing meetings and recommended schedule. And then that was followed by a hearing officer's report on the pre-hearing process. And that was dated September 1st, 2023. That's when it was, that's when it was received. Are you aware of that report?
I'm aware that he submitted a report.
Okay.
And my understanding it was pretty brief.
It was very brief. But one of the things that I found interesting is that he reported that it was his opinion that basically, I'm going to paraphrase this, that the work of the pre-hearing, I guess, collaboration had sort of ceased to be productive. I guess you don't recall that.
I participated in just about every one of those meetings up through August 29th.
Okay.
And actually, the final 2 meetings were actually very productive from all sides.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good to know because that's not necessarily what he indicated, which was part of the reason I think the board. Well, and then of course he resigned also because of health reasons. Okay, thank you. I think the other piece I wanted to ask you about, on top of those two stakeholder processes, the Cumulative Impacts Committee and then the pre-hearing meetings, is are you aware of the work that the prior director of EHD had done when the board started talking about cumulative impacts, and that was way back in February 9th, 2022?
I'm not aware of that. Like I said, I became enrolled August 1 of 22.
Okay. So I will stop asking you questions because it preceded you. But again, I think this is part of the confusion about stakeholder. I'm going to go on to something else. Then the only reason I mentioned that is that in your direct testimony, you said, I'll ask this question. You said the city typically includes existing businesses in your stakeholder process, and as well as community members, and you listed a lot of outreach. So that's the reason I was asking you about that. You also mentioned methods, the petition And the only reason I'm talking about this is because we're going to be deliberating on it, that it needed to identify communities based on metrics. What types of metrics were you thinking were important to identify those communities?
I don't recall stating that. Can you
Okay.
reference where that was?
Yeah, it was in petition 3, but I don't want to cross-examine you. I'm just asking these questions. I think I lost you.
We're here.
Okay. Okay. How does one of the things that came up in your absence was that EHD in their permitting process identified neighborhood sources as part of an effort to look at cumulative impacts. And I had asked the question, I can't recall who it was, it's been a long 5 days, of how they identified those neighborhood sources and if they did that on every occasion that a permit was, a Part 41 permit was being considered. Can you elaborate on that?
So if I can just clarify, so you're asking with respect to air dispersion modeling?
Yes.
We do
I think
cumulative
the
impacts?
yeah, the testimony was that basically you look at source emissions and then you look at background and then you look at the individual said neighborhood sources. And I had asked like, well, how do they figure out what neighborhood sources to look at? How far do they go, et cetera, et cetera? Can you just let us know a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I think Mr. Salente and Mr. Wade gave a pretty good overview of what the department requires. The air dispersion modeling group has a modeling, air dispersion modeling guidelines that are mirrored after the state of New Mexico and also after EPA's Appendix W. So in the county, it was determined to, when we do these modeling studies, is we want to make sure we're very conservative. Because if you lie on the conservative side, typically you don't get a lot of questions. So let's say, for example, a facility comes in and it's a concrete batch plant. They're predominantly a PM source, but they can have some, let's say, combustion activities there. The modelers will look at the inventory of facilities that are permitted in that near area. And I think both Mr. Salente and Mr. Wade yesterday stated that if they are like emission sources, they will be added to what we call nearby sources. And what they also take into account is the amount of pollution based on permit allowables. So they will actually just go out and look and do a radius of impact and see how many facilities are within that area. Now, if there's a source that is larger, let's say that their permit allows are much larger and it's further out, they will consider it, especially if it's downwind or downwind. So they try to capture as many sources as possible to bring into that model. So they will model the facility alone, but they will also include all of the parameters from stack, their emission rates into the model. So let's say you identify your source and then they have identified 7 nearby sources. You're really modeling 7 sources.
Okay.
Okay. So what will happen is the background concentration, which comes into play every year about this time of the year, based on EPA's approval of our pollutant data, which at this time we found out they just approved our submitted carbon monoxide ozone data November 14th. So now the staff will go and calculate the design value for each one of the stations, of the 5 stations. So with that, what they'll do is whatever that model concentration is, in my example, if there's 7 sources, you will get an output. You'll get an output concentration based on whatever the averaging period is for that certain air pollutant, whether it's PM 2.5, NOx, or SO2. They will add that design value of background on top of it.
Okay.
And where it makes it very conservative is that, let's say if the station is in the North Valley or around Jefferson, and that source is located there, that monitor is monitoring all the air pollution activities within that area. So you're capturing not only the stationary sources that are within that area, but you are capturing all the mobile sources. So everybody's phrase is air knows no boundaries. So what you're basically doing is that sampler is collecting everything, it's sniffing everything in that area. So all the mobile, non-road mobile, off-road, construction activities, everything in that area gets a design value. So that number is added to that source. In reality, we've already added in the other 6 sources, which are already part of that design value. So there's a lot of conservatism in it, and it's a very safe approach.
Okay, so let me just ask you a couple. What happens if there's not a monitoring station nearby? That's, say you're testing for PM 2.5 or something, and that area doesn't have a PM 2.5 monitoring station.
And that's a great question. Okay, there's 5 monitoring stations throughout the county. You got one at South Valley, you got one in North Valley, you've got one at Jefferson, one at Del Norte, and you got one at the foothills, which is basically Paseo and probably Tramway area. It's by Double
Okay.
Eagle Elementary. If you're looking at PM 2.5, those 5 stations, if you look at it, they're pretty representative of those areas. And the values don't differ greatly between each one. So let's say if you have a source that's, we'll say it's halfway between the North Valley and the South Valley, and it's right in the middle. They will make a call and say, okay, the design value at South Valley is, I'll just throw a number, is 10. But in North Valley, it's 8.5. They may make a decision and say, we're going to go for the most conservative. We'll put a 10 on there. So staff will always err on the side of conservative.
So can I restate it just to make sure I understand, Mr. Albrecht? Okay, so you take the emissions from the actual source, and then you add, in this case, like you just said, an extrapolation of data from maybe 2 separate monitoring stations. That would be considered background.
Mm-hmm.
And then you look at actual facilities. I guess my question is, when you're looking at the facilities around that site, do you also look at like their permitted emissions based on the air quality permit and add,
Yes.
say if we're looking at 2.5, you add that to that value? Do
Yes,
you guys-
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, we actually grab, like I said in my example, we'll look at the permittee or applicant. We'll look at what their values are, how they present it in their model. And then we will look at each one of the sources, like source A, B, C, and D. We will actually go into their permit, grab all of the test all the stack data, whether it's temperature, exit velocity, it could be the short-term emission rate. It'll be input in there. So whatever A came into our department for a permit, that will be put into the model.
Okay. And then the other question I have is, does that happen for every single Part 41 permit application, or are there certain circumstances where you do that, you perform that type of analysis?
That's a great question too. Everyone asks that question. We do have some exemptions. The ones that are exempted are emergency generators, because emergency generators are considered electric background. They're very intermittent. They're not continuous. They're allowed up to 500 hours a year per federal rules. And so we don't permit any emergency generator over 500 hours. So we don't include that in the modeling. However, if they are used for a peak shaving or any other type of thing where they're doing on-site generation of electricity, they are modeled for sure. And I'm trying to start from the ones we exempt up to the top.
Okay. So in that case, you would not do that, what you just talked about.
Correct. We won't do it.
Permits, would you?
Yeah. So emergency generators, we won't permit, because right now, emergency generators are actually, they are permitted through what we call it air quality notification. So when Part 41, the construction permit was revised back in 2013, there were specific exemptions for what we call permit by rule for emergency generators and gasoline stations. So from 2013 on, if you are not a Title V source, and let's be real clear, if you're not a Title V source, you don't have to model. The AQN is a permit by rule, which this board approved back in 2013 or 14. So they come in, they accept the general circumstances of permitting requirements, reporting requirements, and everything that's in there. And that's for gasoline and emergency generators. The next tier up is a boiler. Okay, we look at boilers. Our rule exempts boilers less than 5 million BTU if it's used for comfort heat or domestic hot water.
So
It's
just
above.
sorry, just to save time. So what you don't have to go through the whole rubric, but
Sure.
for the type of modeling where you look at the nearby facilities, the background plus the source emissions, can you give me an example of what that would be used for? What type of facility?
Or what type of facilities we would require nearby sources?
Yeah, where you have that, yes.
There is in the modeling guidelines, and we've got two gentlemen that are really good about it. And if you ask industry, they're overly strict and very stringent. But they typically will they will evaluate first what the source is. So every concrete batch plant, every asphalt plant will, I can tell you right now, more than likely 99% of the time they will have to require nearby sources to be included in the permit in the modeling exercise. Okay.
And just one last question. Well, I guess two last. So the last revision to 41 was in 2013, it sounds like.
2013, 14, yeah.
Okay. And then the last question, I promise, I know everybody's tired, is in terms of if you're using background for a certain constituent, say PM 2.5, and you're looking at PM 2.5 contributions from the source permit, and then you're looking at nearby facilities with 2.5, it sounds like that's the only thing you look at. So you're not necessarily looking at other constituents that when you do this type of modeling.
It'll go across the board. So if the facility, what I have seen, if the facility triggers, they say it's a 2.5 facility, they will more than likely make you model for NOx and carbon monoxide as well.
Okay, so you would also be looking at NOx and carbon dioxide
Correct.
from the nearby facilities. You'd be extrapolating background, and then you would be doing the source permit.
Yeah, and that's kind of the general rule of thumb, although it's one of those things where it's at the discretion of the modelers to look at that, and every case is very, very different. And that's why they submit a modeling protocol. The facilities will submit a modeling protocol and they may say, hey, we're going to model PM 2.5. It's a small source for carbon monoxide. We request a waiver. Our modelers will look at that and either give them a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So it's very much a case by case. And I don't know who, it was either Mr. Salente or Mr. Wade stated that sometimes you go back and forth they'll go back and forth between the department and looking at the modeling protocol. And they can't go forward unless the two gentlemen approve it.
Okay. We have a ton of dockets, and one last question. Did you do a red line of petitioners version 4 by any chance?
I did not.
Okay. That's all I had. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Member Lewis, do you have any questions?
I do. Thank you. So, Mr. Albrecht, a couple of things. So, if you could help us to understand some of the things we've been hearing from a lot of the people who testified over the last week. I think it was encouraging to hear that in general, people are feeling good about doing something like this. What they're not feeling good about is the amount of time that it is going to take. And so obviously what we're looking at is how can this mesh with what is currently being done. And I think, we've heard a lot about there's a 5-month wait time. And I think it would be really helpful for the board if we could understand. I know you're having a lot of problems filling positions now, and I wondered if that was part of it, or if you could explain a little bit about what that process is that is taking that time. And is there any way of streamlining that?
So it appears there's like 3 questions in there. So
Okay. I thought there was one.
Let me see if I can address the first one. The first one was talking about whether we can implement it, the timing. Is that what the question was?
I think it's just whether this can mesh with what you're doing now, and it's the 5-month period. We wouldn't want to add something that adds on to 5 months. Is there a way to interface this so it doesn't add time, or that the 5 months can be streamlined? How much is due to staffing, et cetera? We just don't understand necessarily what that process is.
Well, there's a couple issues, and I can't remember the doctor's name from Colorado yesterday. Was stating it's looking at the rule. There's a couple of things that are they're really ambiguous, and the one thing I had a hard time with is following it conceptually, is following it from cradle to grave. What are we trying to get at? And I can't remember who said it today, and they said it very eloquently. They said it appears there's 2 regulations within one, and one was a public health aspect with toxics, and then there's the environmental justice. So that is one of the things that when I looked at real quickly at version 6, and I looked at it very quickly because it hit us on last Friday. There's a big redundancy of modeling. This rule actually, it explicitly prescribes certain things for air dispersion modeling that are, in a lot of cases, they're not consistent with the regulatory modeling that is required for every applicant. There's some nuances, and I've heard a gentleman say yesterday, it's easy, you can add this and add that. I don't know how to get there. I don't know how you would get there. I was an air dispersion modeler myself, and I haven't done it in a while. I leave it to the experts of the experts, but it's running this air mod in one thing, it's an art. And when you add this EJ component to it, it adds a lot of complexity. And I've literally, ever since this concept of coming out with the modeling, I've been trying to wrap my arms around it and trying to figure out what does that mean for the program. And what I came up with is we're mixing a regulatory model that we have really no latitude to defer from that. So what does that mean? That means they're going to run 2 models, regardless. I think they're going to run 2 models based on what they've put into their petition. It was interesting. I came across. I run around and I look at inside EPA and Federal Register, and what came across my email this morning was EPA is proposing a tool called Nexus. I don't know if anybody's heard this, but I came across and I wrote it down. It's a new screening tool, and EPA is looking at it's considered a multi-pollutant advanced screening tool that ensures sources info, and it considers EJ screen parameters. So they're actually looking at this thing called Nexus. I don't know how far they are along with it, but they introduced it, and I went. And I guess my comment is with that is it just seems, I've heard before, with this, it just seems so rushed and hurried. EPA it looks like they're really trying to identify how to address this EJ screen. We've heard from people, how do you do this? Do you use EJ screen 2.0? Do you use EJ whatever, whether it's the NEJACs, whatever that is, but they're looking at that. We have Echo that tacks into EJ screen, but now you have Nexus. So any tools that you prescribe, it's gonna be outdated. And one of the lessons I've learned,
Okay.
and I've been doing this for quite a while, is that these types of tools are constantly being retooled. Something new comes up.
Oh.
You know, who would have thought the ICST, for the people that ran that model years ago, who would ever thought area mod would come? Well, it's been in place for 15, 17, 18 years now. But what's the next model?
So
So-
I'm sorry, I don't want to cut you off, but I know there's a lot of people who want to ask questions, and I appreciate hearing those comments, and that's certainly something we should be taking into account as we do the deliberation. So thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Lewis. Board Member Armijo.
I think I've heard that normally your division creates rules for implementation. And we've heard from these folks from Mountain View saying that they've been contacting your office. I know you've only been there for a little while, for many, many years. And I'm just wondering why you guys didn't take the reins and create a rule.
Again, I can't speak for my predecessors, but what I can speak to with this last one, my understanding is there was a rule that was presented. I think it was presented to this board years ago, but it was not heard. So I understand that. With this second one, my understanding, and I think I can't remember who asked me, was about the cumulative impact committee. And this is my understanding. What I've been briefed on was there was a committee that was facilitated, and I guess they worked on it for a couple months. But my understanding again is that there's no progress. There wasn't much progress. So we, as a department, we stayed back because our understanding was this committee was going to actually facilitate and propose something, but that never happened.
Did your organization participate in any way in making this rule?
This rule? Not at
Yes.
all. Not at all.
Okay. The other question I have is about implementation, similarly, as you were talking about. If a rule is created and if the screening tools in the rule are readily available without any manipulation or anything else, would that be an undue burden? Would that cause more delay, expense on your part?
Yeah, and here's the other part of this is when the original petition, and I'm going to clarify my last answer to you. So you said, did we come on the petition? The original petition in November, no, we didn't. It was just given to us. During the pre-conference hearings, versions 2 and 3, yes, with those meetings, we did provide feedback. But 4, 5, and 6, no, we didn't do that. So I'll get back to your question, is the implementation. And this is where it's very difficult for me overseeing this program. One of my job duties is to look at the program. What are the needs? What rules and regulations, what things are coming down the pike, whether it's federal, statewide, or in this case, you're always looking to say how can you implement it? You know, what's the scope and objective of it? And third, funding. How do you determine funding? What's the funding mechanism to do it? With this rule in the version 3, it was going toward, it was its own rule that was a pre-Part 41 rule. I've been hearing testimony in version 6, which I didn't read a whole lot in version 6. It looks like it's a parallel process again. And that is problematic because if you do a parallel process in the way it looks, it appears that I would have to build another part of a division to review this specific model. And, you know, if they're looking at air toxics, I don't have anybody on staff that's a toxicologist. I got to hire a toxicologist. I've got 2 modelers now that we have 1,340 active permits. At any given time, like right now, we got about 50 to 60 current permit in the queue that we're reviewing. And we've got 2 modelers there doing all those modeling.
So it sounds
this-
like a staffing issue.
It'd be a staffing issue. I would literally and this is a guess. And if I were to do part 41 and mirror it to this, I would say I would need 3 or 4 staff.
Okay,
And that's just a shot in the dark.
thank you.
Member Galuski?
Hi, Mr. Albrecht. Thanks. I'll try to be focused and brief. I think you touched on this, but I just want to clarify. Did you meet with the petitioners at any point to talk about the details of the proposed rule and the implementability and give them some feedback?
Yeah, and I can give you a pretty good timeline of when I was introduced to this. So we were notified by New Mexico Environmental Law Center, and they wanted to have a meeting with us. And we did. We met with them November 14th at their offices with their parties, their clients. And it was stated to us that they had a proposed rule and they wanted to talk to us about it. So myself, there was probably 6 of us staff went down there, and we thought we were going to see a draft rule. But what it was a whiteboard concepts and talking about, okay, this here, or denial here. So it was more conversational, right? And we had asked if we could see a draft. And what reasonable thing, right? We're the regulatory agency. Here's a draft to give your feedback. We didn't get that. What happened is a week later, November 21 is when they petitioned to you, the board, to promulgate this rule. So that's from there. That is when board decided, yeah, we'll hear the rule. The hearing officer, we agreed to pre-hearing conferences. And that is when we started providing feedback on each one of the versions.
So once the board agreed to take this up, it sounds like that sort of changed your relationship with the rule. Is that accurate? Because it seemed like you were willing to meet. You met with them initially informally, but then once the petition was accepted, what happened then?
It's an interesting thing. So when a petitioner puts it before the board, we're very careful of doing any kind of ex parte communication. Meeting with them at that, it's kind of, we just want to make sure, because it's not our petition, it's theirs, that we just kind of stayed away.
Mhm.
Because we met with them 14th, they dropped it on the 21st, and I think they did meet on the 5th, just to have a discussion. I wasn't part of that though. And then here we are.
Because I'm sure if you've been listening to the testimony, virtually everyone has said that there was not enough interaction with EHD.
I agree with that. Typically when we do rulemaking, let's say if we're the petitioners, we'll identify, okay, we're going to do this rule, and we come up with the objective. Why are we doing this rule? Can we implement it? Is it enforceable? Yes. Okay. Let's put pen to paper. We will meet as a group. We usually assign 1 lead person from every division to get a very collaborative work, a good product. Once we get it to draft form, typically you want to get stakeholder input. You will meet with a regulated community. You will meet with whomever is interested. That didn't happen. And I think that's one of the things I've been hearing. And that's what we've been stating is, if we would have been up front, let's say back in June, and if we would have been at the table in June, I think we could have provided them some really good guidance. And I do think we were at the table in August and all those hearings. There was there was good collaboration. I'm not to say there wasn't disagreements, because there were. I mean, there's some things that they weren't willing to, sacrifice, which was fine, which is why in August, if you remember, the board asked, red line, strike out the rule. The rule at that time, if we red line striked it, that whole paper would have been red. And so we decided we went in like 5th gear, and we met bi-weekly, 2-3 times a week for hours, and trying to put together something that would be enforceable, something we could enforce. And that's what was presented to the board in August. It's our perspective, that the concepts. And we stated to the Law Center in one of the last meetings is, And I think I even brought it up in the expert testimony that we had as well with the big group is if you look at what we presented, I think this is a good start. And it needs to be worked on. There's things that need to be done, but at least it would have it was a good start.
Thanks. There's more I would love to chat about, but I'll let some others ask questions. Thank you.
Board Member Kalman, before we get to the chair, do you have any questions?
Just three really quick ones, and you can answer them super briefly, I think. Could you just estimate how many permit applications per year for air quality EHD processes on average?
Okay, turn the mic back on. We receive approximately, and it's kind of in flux. So every month, there's always 50 to 60 in the queue. Okay, so we issue approximately 90 to 100 permits a year.
Okay, thanks. Sorry. Let me write that down. Does EHD
Average.
That's okay. That's fine. I just wanted to have it in my mind, approximately. Does EHD ever impose requirements for permits beyond what is required by law and regulation?
That would be on a case by case. Okay, so I think Mr. Salente and Mr. Wade stated very well. Usually, when a company comes in with a facility, they will assume 8760 because if you can pass 8760 at your facility, then you can get a permit. So what they do is then they go. If they can't, they'll ratchet down. And sometimes a facility will be forced to actually go up to a control technology that is much higher than required by federal law or even state law or state regulation. They try to go operational first. They do operational restrictions with time of day or hours, but lots of times they will go to a control technology that is higher in efficiency to do that. And when they come to the department, that will become an enforceable condition of the permit. And sometimes we'll suggest the only way you're going to get this is if you go to this type of level of control technology.
Okay.
We can't tell them because federally and locally by rule, we can't tell them what to use unless they are part of a source category under NSPS or a niche app.
Okay, thanks. And then just really quickly, you've probably heard reference that the board we did set up these cumulative impact committees a couple of years ago. I don't remember now whether it was 2 or 3. I'm losing track of time completely. But can you just say whether EHD was a participant in the cumulative impact committee that we set up?
My understanding is they were involved for a period, but then they were not involved. And I don't know if it was whether the committee kind of broke down. I'm not sure about that. Again, it was right when I kind of arrived and things were kind of occurring then.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Chair Paul.
Thank you. Hi, Mr. Albrecht. The first one is just, you mentioned EHD communicating with petitioners being ex parte communication. Is that right? Isn't it between a decision maker and the parties?
Yeah, and I always like to err on the side of whenever a rule goes through. I like to err on the side of just going through the process first.
But EHD was a party, right? Not a decision maker.
Yeah, we are a party.
Can parties talk to each other outside of the?
I'm sure they can. Yeah.
Okay.
Just not with the other attorney. You can't. If the attorney is present, no, you can't.
Okay. Other than denying permits, is there another method to decrease air pollution or not increase air pollution in general from a source?
So you're asking is there any other mechanism outside a permit condition that would force a facility to lower their emissions?
No, what I'm saying is, a lot of the business interests have said, we want to know if we're going to be denied, and we don't think that this is a good reason to deny, or all this stuff that essentially if you want to not have air pollution or more air pollution or less, if you want to have less air pollution in an area, is there something other than permit denial that can be required?
No,
So
because
control technology
yeah.
cannot.
well, if a facility comes in for a permit,
Yeah.
and they've demonstrated compliance with the modeling, and they are subject to an NSPS or NESHAP or any kind of control technology, that's what it is. I mean, we can't force them to ratchet down any further.
Okay, I guess I didn't ask that question well. What I meant was not according to the current regulation, but in a new regulation, would requiring control technology be a method alternative to denying a permit to decrease air pollution in general? I understand that there's an additive question there, but I'm just
Yeah.
saying if a facility is polluting at X amount and you're saying, no, you can't operate or you can control it, those are two options, right?
So if a facility comes in and they want a permit, let's say at the ceiling is 100. Okay, that's the standard. They come in and they come at 95%. If they can meet that 95% with whatever control technology, we would be inclined to issue that permit. We couldn't say, you know what, by the way, we don't want 95% of the air taken up. We want you to be at 75. We don't have that authority.
Okay, thanks. I think that, so the NACs are the design value for pollution allowances, right? For in Albuquerque.
So the NACs are the ambient air quality standards.
Right, but we design pollution allowances so they don't exceed the NACs. Is that accurate?
No.
Oh,
You got two, I think you got two mixed up. So
Okay.
the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, if it's talking about ozone, is 70 parts per billion.
right. So when you model, you're showing that you are not, that your facility isn't making ambient air quality exceed the NACs.
That's why you do the dispersion modeling, to make sure
Great. Yeah.
at the property fence line, they are not exceeding the NACs.
Perfect. So in this, is there a value that they're not exceeding for hazardous air pollutants or TAPs? HAPs or TAPs?
We don't model for HAPs or TAPs.
Okay. And then finally, other folks have commented, but you probably know better about how long it takes for a business to get a permit. Maybe a minor source permit, or I know it's going to depend on the type of permit, but can you tell me about how long it takes to get a minor source permit on average, maybe a major source, and then maybe something simple?
Well, when I first got to the department, it was taking up to 2 years to issue permits. Not acceptable. And the reason being, there was a couple issues that go on there. A lot of it was staff. There wasn't enough staff that was in there. And what I was noticing is staff was taking up every one of the regulatory requirements. So if you had a 30-day notice, they were taking 30 days. And the reason why is if there was 50 permits that were in the queue and there's 2 staff, you had 2 staff dealing with it all. So they were pushing up to the 30 days. So typically an applicant wants you to rule complete by day 3, right? So you chew off 27, 28 days. That wasn't happening. Once you rule complete, it goes into a 30-day mandatory public notice. But within that 30-day notice is also 90 days. So the 30 days is within the 90 days that we have by statute to issue the permit. If you can't issue the permit, the statute allows us to request up to 90 days more. So what was happening is you can see this big volume of, you go to 30 days, we go to 90, I need a 90-day extension. So when I first got on, I was issuing so many 90-day extensions. So now you're looking at 180 plus 30, 210 days. And they were also exceeding the 180 as well. And it was problematic. So when I got on board, we retooled a lot of things. I actually I was writing permits during that time just to help staff.
Thank you so much. I think you've helped answer my
Yeah,
question.
and it's, so that's where we're at with that.
Okay, I think there might be one more question from them.
Vice Chair Richards, I see that you've raised your hand. Did you have a question?
I'm sorry, I forgot to lower my hand.
Okay. I'm going to suggest that we recess at this time, start fresh on Monday morning, 10 o'clock, same location. Is that correct? We'll start.
Your Honor,
uh,
this is Ms. Sona.
Yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify. I don't know if this one's been used all day. Just wanted to clarify whether we would get an opportunity to redirect Mr. Albrecht tomorrow,
Certainly.
or I mean Monday. It's been a long week.
Monday,
Thank you.
I've got you listed as last in the order. So we may have some time constraints on Monday, so I will consult with the board about closing argument and how much time will be allocated for that, if any. So we'll take that up on Monday. Chair Paul has indicated that we may start closer to 10:30, but I'll be here at 10 o'clock.
Hearing
Okay,
officer, I did want to note an objection, however, because there has been a special meeting noticed for Monday between 9 and 11 o'clock as a closed session. So if 9 to 11 o'clock is
It's not going
happening.
to take us that long. Sorry, to answer your question quickly.
So nobody has verified or clarified anything to me. I haven't heard anything that this room is actually reserved again on Monday. We were told that it was no longer reserved after today at 8 o'clock. And some of us made other plans with our employment. So I'm just trying to get the clarification. When did this happen? Because I didn't get any notification of it.
I can answer that. And so in our, I believe it was a hearing order,
We filed, well, I'll just say. I asked, what day is today? It's Friday. God. I believe on Wednesday, and I probably should look at my emails. I believe on Wednesday, we asked for a special meeting request, and it didn't go out, I think, until 10 o'clock or something. Was that Wednesday that happened?
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
There's two questions here. One, the special meeting that's happening, that's a Zoom meeting that doesn't have to do with this
Right.
hearing.
And so the time, we had no idea what was, it was just to get it out there. I don't believe that it's going to last 2 hours. In fact, we'll probably make sure it doesn't last 2 hours, and it'll probably last an hour.
Well, it would be helpful to get some information from the board then as to what they're considering with regard to closings, because we've had so many requests for clarification. Are there going to be oral? Are they going to be written? Are they going to be in person? We need to be able to prepare.
So what I would like to hear from everyone is how many parties do we have that want to do a closing statement individually?
We have about 10
One,
parties.
two,
Is it
10?
verbal or written or
Verbal.
verbal? Okay.
Depending on
How many?
the Air Force and Kirtland Air Force Base and Ms. Semino, I think we probably got somewhere between 10 and 12 parties that would present closing. So if we went 10 minutes each, that's 2 hours of closing. So so you may want to plan on no more than 10 minutes per party per closing argument.
They can submit written closing.
Mr. Hearing Officer, this is Vice Chair Richards. Can you hear me?
Yes, I have to always look around to see who's talking, but
Sorry.
I see. That's fine.
I know it gets
Yes.
a little confusing and it's late. I just wanted to ask Chair Paul and others on the board, is there any way that we can request, instead of taking 2 hours for listening to closing comments, can we ask that they be written? Is there any issue with doing that so that we can read it instead?
I assume that it's easier for them to come and talk than to submit it in writing, but
Yeah, I'm just thinking for our time, but Chair Paul, that it might be more efficient for us to be able
we will have the rest of the day. So from noon on.
some of
Yeah,
us.
I think
will.
that's enough time.
Depending on
Okay.
how long Mr. Albrecht will be taken to complete his examination, you can kind of take it from there. How much time that 2 hours will take, probably going into the afternoon. So
Yeah.
if we can complete his testimony between 10 and 12:30, then we can take up about 2 hours of closing argument between 1:30 and 3:30.
And I just want to remind the board that we have decision, regarding a decision on even allowing closing statements. We do not need to do that. And I am very concerned that we will not have adequate time to deliberate on the actual rule.
I've indicated up to 10 minutes. It might be restricted to 5 minutes each. I'll
Can I
consult
make
with the board.
a recommendation to leave it at 5 minutes instead, Mr. Hearing Officer? I want to have ample time to deliberate.
Right. I'll consult with you all on Monday morning.
And Mr. Hearing Officer,
Yes, Mr. Mullenberg.
sorry to jump in, but I just wanted I recall Mr. Boutsier's motion earlier today about written closing arguments following the availability of a transcript. I wanted to join in that motion on behalf of the New Mexico Mining Association and the New Mexico Chamber of Commerce. So just wanted to note that for the record.
Thank you. Because of time constraints, that might not be possible.
Mr. Hearing Officer,
Yes, Mr. Domenici, I do recognize your voice. Sorry.
are we going to be allowed to, excuse me, ask questions for Mr. Albrecht?
Yes, I'm going to go down the line. Hopefully we can complete his testimony Monday morning, and then we'll address the closing argument, whether it's going to remain at 5 minutes or 10 minutes per party. So it'll go about an hour if we go to 5 minutes. I go to 2 hours if we go to 10 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. 10 a.m. 10. Thank you very much.